in our communities across the nation. And so today we have a variety of speakers with many personal and professional perspectives on the way that the climate is changing in Arizona and how that's affecting our communities. I want to keep these introductions short so that our speakers have plenty of time, so I'll go ahead and introduce Representative Randy Freese, who is the Assistant Minority Leader in the Arizona State Legislature. Dr. Freese was first elected to the House of Representatives by District 9 in 2014. He is currently the ranking Democrat on the Health Committee and also serves on the Judiciary Committee. Since 2008, he's been a trauma surgeon and professor of surgery at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. Man, he was one of the trauma surgeons who cared for the victims of the January 8th, 2011 shooting in Tucson that wounded Congresswoman Giffords. I'm grateful that you found time in your schedule, but please welcome Representative Freese.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you very much. You know, not only do I care for people, I do try to care for my environment. We have solar in our home, and we do the best we can for water conservation. So I think this is very important. Thank you for having this event and bringing us together. You know, I want to talk a little bit today about the politics behind climate change. Is kind of an unfortunate thing that we have to talk about the politics behind climate change. I am a politician, however, I prefer to be referred to as a policy maker. But unfortunately, we have to address the politics, and I wanted to spend a few minutes doing that. So let me start out by saying that I'm a politician who believes climate change is real. I'm a politician who believes that human activity contributes to this phenomenon. And we have to get past the debate about whether climate change exists and move on to the debate about developing best practices to address this issue in a meaningful way. Certainly, with meaningful action, we can mitigate the effects of climate change, but if we continue on the current path of turning our backs on science, we won't be able to mitigate the effects. We'll actually probably be expediting the effects of climate change. So you might say, as a policymaker and a politician, what do I think is appropriate action? Well, you know what? The first, very most basic step of appropriate action is to be sure that we appoint qualified people to advise the federal government on science. And I'll just want to mention Mr. Sam Clovis. Mr. Clovis is a non-scientist. Mr. Clovis is a climate change denier who has been nominated by the Trump administration to serve as the chief scientist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, I want to read this from their website. What is the responsibility and duty of the USDA chief scientist? Directly from their website. To provide strategic coordination of the science that informs the Department of Agriculture and federal government on decisions impacting, among other things, renewable energy, natural resources, and the environment. I'd just like to say to Senator Flake, it is your responsibility through the Senate's process of advise and consent to reject this nominee. You have said in the media that the president should have his people, those nominees he chooses to work with toward his agenda. I submit that no president should have their people if those nominees are unqualified to carry out the responsibilities of that appointed office. And a non-scientist has no qualifications to be chief scientist. So, Senator Flake, you must stop your votes against the environment. You must stop turning your back on science. You must reject Sam Clovis's nomination and start moving us toward responsible solutions instead of perpetuating a failed argument. Join the rest of us to protect the environment. Join the rest of us and welcome a green economy. Let's protect the environment and grow our economy. We can do both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Freese. Up next, we have Dr. Tracy Osborne, who is an assistant professor in the School of Geography and Development at the University of Arizona. Dr. Osborne is a professor, and she is a leading scholar on the social and political economic dimensions of climate change and conducts research on equitable climate solution based on forest stewardship and renewable energy. She received her PhD from the Energy and Resources Group at the University of California, Berkeley, And she is here today on her own, expressing her opinions as an informed citizen who has been deeply engaged in these issues for 2 decades, and not as a representative of the University of Arizona. Dr. Osborne.
Thanks so much, Nicholas, and thank you for the invitation. So, as a professor, I teach a large undergraduate course on environmental issues, and just yesterday, a first-year undergraduate student spoke so eloquently expressing her deep concerns about climate change and frustration that political leaders have failed to take action when the scientific evidence is so clear. And as a social science researcher who has studied climate change impacts in the US and abroad, as well as mitigation strategies intended to solve the problem, I know that climate change impacts are already underway. The Southwest region, for example, has experienced more heat waves and severe droughts over the last decade, and according to the Southwest Climate Change Assessment Report, the region is predicted to become even hotter and drier, exacerbating wildfires, reducing agricultural yields, and causing heat-related deaths. Climate change impacts will hit low-income communities and communities of color hardest. Among the communities with the lowest income in Arizona, Latinos and Native Americans are not only more likely to suffer from heat exposure, particularly those who work outdoors, but these communities disproportionately suffer from health issues associated with high-polluting industries, such as coal-fired power plants, often located in close proximity to the places where they live and work and where their children play. Therefore, we need strong political leadership on climate change that will protect vulnerable communities at home and abroad. What we don't need is the rollback on environmental laws, protections, and safeguards that we've seen under the current EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, or the retreat on US climate commitments to the Paris Accord being pursued under the Trump administration. Instead, we need the type of political leadership shown by Tucson's Mayor Jonathan Rothschild, who is among the more than 350 mayors committed to uphold the goals of the Paris Agreement, despite the short-sighted decisions made nationally. These mayors, governors such as California's Jerry Brown, and many business leaders in national governments around the world recognize that taking action on climate change is not only a moral obligation, but also an economic opportunity. So with US solar market nearly doubling in installed capacity between 2015 and 2016, investing in solar could provide enormous economic benefits for the state, as well as much needed employment in installation, construction, and manufacturing. Investing in renewable energy makes sense, as for every $1 million invested, there are twice as many jobs generated in solar when compared to coal and natural gas. With its high solar capacity, Arizona could be a leader in renewable energy and clean tech. So these types of actions represent an important starting place that might inspire other cities, states to address climate change through strong environmental laws, protections, and safeguards, and investing in renewable energy. I believe that these actions would go a long way toward relieving some of the anxiety our youth face with regards to climate change and catalyze the transition to renewable energy we so desperately need. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Osborne. Up next, we have the Reverend Steve Keplinger from Grace St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Reverend Keplinger began his ministry at Grace St. Paul's on Sunday, September 12, 2010. Born and raised in Baltimore, Steve spent the majority of his life in the state of Maryland with a short stint in the mountains of West Virginia. All that changed after his first trip to the western United States, where he fell in love with the landscape, especially the red rock deserts of southern Utah and northern Arizona. After a raft trip down the Colorado, his first night under a sky brilliant with thousands of stars, he determined to move west. Steve has a passion for creative liturgy, preaching, and social and environmental justice. Welcome, Reverend Keplinger.
Thank you. You said my name right. Nobody ever says my name right. Thank you. That's very cool. I'm going to take a little broader view here, as you might imagine, so bear with me. Lao Tzu, Confucius, the Buddha, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Gandhi, those are the names we know so well from the most respected faith traditions in history. through their actions, major shifts have taken place in the way people understood their place in the universe. Why are these people the most important that ever lived, and how did they manage to change the fabric of their cultures? First, each was what we would term today a sociologist. They had an innate ability to survey the world around them and recognize the outcast, the rejected, the segregated, the portion of society that was being devalued by others. Once identified, all of these leaders were then able to restore dignity to those who were being oppressed, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. To do so, each of them had to break through the worldview of the day to create an entirely new way of understanding morality and ethics. In my own lifetime, I have seen this happen twice more. When the world said that the tension and hatred between blacks and whites could never be broken in South Africa, Desmond Tutu changed the very values of that nation to bring about healing and justice. In our own country, Martin Luther King Jr. redefined the way all of us relate to one another, bringing us that much closer to the ideal of egalitarianism envisioned by the framers of this land. If you and I really believe that we are here to make the world a better place, I know of no better model than the one used by every one of those great leaders. So let us start with that sociological question. Who is it that is being most abused by the power structures of our day? Who is it that we denigrate the most in our culture? Now, unfortunately, there remain many possible choices. As we have just been reminded again in the last few weeks, we continue to segregate ourselves from our fellow human beings, causing their devaluation. But in our time, the most heinous segregation of all is the one we have built between ourselves and the rest of the planet. All of you know exactly what this segregation has created. It has allowed us to defile the air, the water, and the land in unspeakable ways because we have understood it as something separate from ourselves. The earth and the atmosphere is also the most vulnerable because it can do nothing to defend itself against whatever we perpetrate upon it. We have taken what the Holy One continuously refers to as very good in the first book of my sacred text, and we have devalued it, turning the planet into an object for our personal use, abuse, and misuse. Now we are on the verge of not only flooding our planet from the polar ice caps and killing off species that have been on this earth for thousands of years, but we now have irrefutable evidence, as you are hearing again today, that this is threatening all of humanity's existence, not just those who live on the coast. Now, as an Episcopal priest, I would dearly love to tell you that it is a greedy segment of our business community and our hide your eyes, maybe it will disappear politicians that have placed us on the edge of this ecological disaster. But the truth of the matter is that this is our fault, the religious leaders of today's world. We have not interpreted our sacred texts for our present day situation. We have not followed the example of our predecessors of identifying the causes of segregation, destruction, and abuse in our world, and then working to change that worldview. So this morning, I accept my part in creating the situation in which we find ourselves. I accept that I come from a tradition that was so fearful of pantheism they turned God into a transcendent being that was totally separate and distinct from the universe, allowing us to treat our earth as an object rather than a part of us and a part of the divine. So now it is time that we have to do something about it. Yes, climate change is already making life unlivable for the people we serve up at Grace St. Paul's every day. We've had more heat strokes this year in our disenfranchised population we serve than we have ever had. But what we all need to realize is that this is only the beginning. I am not asking you to just respond to an immediate crisis. I'm asking you to see that we are facing the greatest challenge of our lifetimes. We have a call to see beyond our own self-interests and the concerns of the population we serve, to realize that we need to act for the safety of the entire planet. We have a moral, an ethical, and a spiritual obligation to reverse this destruction, an obligation that overrides all of our other concerns. Every age has a deep calling to bring about a wholly new worldview. This is the evangelism of our time. It is time for every single one of us to do all in our power to stop the misdirection, to end this absurd, undocumented, and obviously ridiculous notion that this is a hoax. It is time to do everything we humanly can to not only reverse climate change, but to realize that we have a single destiny, not just with each other as humans, but with this entire planet. It is time for us to hear not just the cry of our people, but the cry of our entire Earth, an Earth that can only survive with our protection. There is nothing more important that any of us will ever do.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Russell John Lowe's, Advisory Board Member for the Physicians for Social Responsibility Arizona Chapter and Energy Chair for the Sierra Club Rincon Group. He is the key author of an economics book on coal and nuclear energy costs, which was used as the key document to stop investment in Palo Verde nuclear units 4 and 5. Citizens of California cities put initiatives on the ballot with their municipal electric companies and successfully stopped their investment, forcing the project manager to drop these units, about $7.4 billion worth of construction. More lately, Russell has worked with many others to stop the global nuclear renaissance. He is the lead researcher writer at www.safeenergyanalyst.org. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. The largest contributor to global climate chaos is energy at 61% on a global level. Hence, I will focus on related impacts and solutions of with energy today. There's a myth being promoted by Scott Pruitt and the Trump administration that we cannot afford to fight climate change. First, they deny that climate change is even an issue, but then they say it is too expensive to correct climate change problems. Both of these assumptions are wrong. EPA head Pruitt and his gang are attempting to divide the public and pit them against each other. They create this division based on pure nonsense. They say that it is too expensive that we will lose jobs if we switch away from coal burning in our northern Arizona Navajo coal plant. They say that it is expensive and job losing to go solar, even here in Arizona. They say that if we do make any switch, it will have to be a switch away from coal to gas. And they say that switching from coal so far has been made possible by fracked gas. Back in reality, the switch away from coal is being made more with energy efficiency, solar and wind. The report, The Good News, by Charles Komanoff has proven that energy efficiency and renewable energies are taking the majority of the decreases of coal reduction. It is now more economical and ecological to not have coal, with the associated costs of lung cancer, lung damage of different sorts to the citizenry, hospitalizations and diminishment of our wild fish in the seas, worldwide through ocean acidification. It is more economical and better ecology to have energy efficiency reduce our energy production. It is more penny-wise and dollar-wise and ecological to replace fracked gas with nuclear energy with solar and wind, combined with energy storage, energy management, and renewables, of course. It is more economical and ecological to have strong environmental protection agency to keep Arizonans and our environment healthier and bolstering our economy all at the same time by keeping people productive and by keeping them more engaged with our economy and society. And it is more economical and ecological to keep a strong EPA to reduce chemical harm to our drinking water and air and to reduce the resultant health effects. The EPA protects all Americans and Arizonans from the dangers of pollution and at the same time saves money for America as a whole. A number of national representatives and senators, namely Flake, McSally, etc., are good on talk, but fall in lockstep with President Trump on voting for his cabinet and agenda. The cabinet was hired to destroy the agencies they had, and much of the agency agenda is in line with that goal. These same politicians have tried to appear tough on Trump, but have gone right along with the voting process. The reality is environment and economics are more and more mutually linked in this 21st century. When fewer people die from pollutants and when fewer species are eliminated due to lower pollution levels, the economic benefits outweigh the costs. When you implement more energy efficiency and more renewable energy, employment increases, the economy improves, and the environmental impacts decrease. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Jennifer Allen, who is the Senior Vice President, Community and Civic Engagement for the League of Conservation Voters and board member of Las Adelitas, Arizona. Jennifer joined the League of Conservation Voters in April 2013 to develop a program aimed at building the voice and leadership Latino families and leaders in the fight against climate change. With grassroots community organizing programs operating in Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and Maryland, the program has become one of the largest national efforts focused on Latino communities. For more than a decade, Jennifer was the founding executive director of the Border Action Network, then Arizona's largest immigrant and border community organization, where she developed successful state and national policy campaigns that were led by immigrant families. Jennifer's prior experience includes economic and community development work with indigenous and rural communities throughout the Southwest. She is an appointee to the Citizen Advisory Committees for the City of Tucson, where she lives with her family. Welcome, Jennifer.
The challenge with being towards the end, obviously, with behind this illustrious crew, is that as they were speaking, I was like, oh, I should scratch that line in my comments because there's going to be a hint of redundancy, but you know, just smile and nod. Pretend like it's the first time you've heard it. Buenos días. Buenos días. Y gracias por la oportunidad de estar aquí con ustedes. I'm Jennifer Allen. 4 generations of my family call Arizona home. But never have I been more concerned about their future, our state's future, and the future of our nation than I have been over the last few months. It's no longer news, right, that the Trump administration has filled the cabinet with people who either know next to nothing about the agencies that they now oversee or who are hell-bent to work to undermine the very work and responsibilities that those agencies implement. And moreover, to ensure that as they work to undermine them, that profit margins indeed supersede the health, education, housing, and other fundamental needs and rights that all people in our nation deserve. Earlier this year, with the support of Senators Flake and McCain, Trump nominated Scott Pruitt to head the Environmental Protection Agency. Scott Pruitt has made a career out of serving the interests of large corporate polluters and attacking and undermining the EPA. Since he's assumed his role at the head of the EPA, they have proposed, he and Trump have laid out a proposed budget to slash the agency by 25% and has literally waged war on some of our bedrock environmental protections for clean air and clean water. It's also anticipated that he will gut the agency's environmental justice program by 78%, and is eliminating additional programs that work to counter the fact that communities of color have been targeted by polluters and excluded by decision making that impacts the health of their communities. So let me be clear. Low-income communities of color, Native communities, are hit the first and worst by pollution and by the impacts of climate change. Study after study has shown consistently higher levels of pollution in predominantly Latino, Asian, and African American neighborhoods. 80% of Latinos live in neighborhoods that do not meet federal EPA air quality standards. Asthma attacks send African Americans to the emergency room at 3 times the rate of whites, and African American children are 4 times as likely to die from asthma attacks as white children. If we fail to mitigate climate change, these same communities will be the most vulnerable to droughts, heat waves, and superstorms. But we can see these dynamics bear out here in Tucson. Lower income, predominantly immigrant families that live just south of Tucson in the county area, dirt roads, are often the most flood-prone areas. Helicopters fly in to rescue people, cars and homes are flooding down the roads. Tucson's heat islands, in fact, are clustered in low-income Latino neighborhoods throughout the city, where there is also weaker structures, and there's also slower response times in emergencies when there's crises. With fewer resources and less job security, Tucson's low-income communities of color and Native communities have a harder time getting back on their feet in the wake of extreme weather, disasters, and other impacts of climate change. But Frederick Douglass's words sort of shift that there is indeed some hope and opportunity for change. Frederick Douglass's words are as apt now as they were in the 1850s. Power concedes nothing without demand. Trump, Pruitt, and their polluter friends are not going to change policies because of a change of heart. Across the country, including here in Arizona, families are organizing and are building power to insist in the right to clean, healthy, and safe communities for today and for future generations. Earlier this year, CHISPA, a community organizing program of the League of Conservation Voters that operates in 6 states, including Arizona, launched a new campaign, Clean Buses for Healthy Niños. It's a campaign that's calling on Governor Ducey to allocate Arizona's portion, $57 million, of the Volkswagen settlement fund that was settled because of them having lied about emissions, pollution rates from their diesel vehicles. But calling on Ducey to protect children's health. Clean Buses for Healthy Niños is organizing parents and students to call on Ducey to convert our schools' dirty diesel school buses to clean electric buses. School buses are the largest form of public transportation in our country. Every day, more than 300,000 children in Arizona ride buses to and from school. However, the simple, iconic bus spews out soot, sulfur, carbon, further impacting those who have respiratory illness, asthma, and exacerbating the impacts of climate change. So to learn more or get involved in this campaign, you can text the word buses to 877-877. And together, we can be part of that demand, right, for healthy communities, clean air, and a safe planet for today's and future generations. But we can also be part of the demand that we have a president, that we have heads of agencies and senators who prioritize the people of our nation over the profits of polluters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and that didn't sound repetitive at all. It just lets us know from how many angles we can criticize the current administration. So that leaves me. I'm Nicholas Garber. I'm the Conservation Program Manager here at Native Seed Search, and climate change is a strong motivator for a lot of our actions taken at this agency. But we gathered today as a group of legislators, thinkers, and scientists, and community and spiritual leaders out of concern for the gutting of the EPA and the Clean Air Act by the current administration. Unfortunately, it appears to be aided by Arizona's own congressional representation. All of us have personal and professional perspectives on the negative impacts of climate change on our communities, but plainly, the current environmental protections for our water and air are a small step toward protecting the health and welfare of even the most vulnerable in our communities. But more is needed, not less, to sustain a recognizable planet for future generations. Today, we're here to demand accountability from our governmental leadership for the undermining of current environmental protections, especially from Jeff Flake, who has a voting record 95% in line with the current administration, including support for the nomination of Scott Pruitt to head the EPA. And I'll just reflect Jennifer's statement. He is a career corporatist who has previously sued the EPA numerous times on behalf of oil companies. Native Seed Search is particularly concerned with environmental protections because conventional agriculture contributes 1/3 total greenhouse gases with the current protections in place. At Native Seed Search, we protect the seeds stewarded in the greater Southwest by indigenous cultures here for 4,000 years. To meaningfully conserve this refuge of crop biodiversity, we also must protect our precious shared natural resources so that these seeds have healthy soils and clean water to flourish. But a majority of counties in Arizona have been designated natural disaster areas due to extreme drought conditions. Native American communities in the desert Southwest may be the most vulnerable to dramatic social and environmental upheaval due to climate change. However, Jeff Flake is celebrating the end of the Waters of the United States protections, which will allow higher concentrations of toxic pollutants in more of our waterways. All the while, our stakeholders on the Navajo Nation, whose waterways were flooded with 3 million gallons of toxic wastewater from the 2015 Gold King mine spill, are now being denied compensation by the current EPA for the estimated $1.2 billion with a B dollars of economic damages caused by that spill. The contaminants currently restricted are not controversial as they are known causes of cancer and developmental disabilities in children. And 2/3 of the water surveyed by the EPA in the state of Arizona are currently considered impaired or requiring intervention to meet EPA guidelines. Yet, Jeff Flake and the current administration continue to characterize limits on toxic contaminants in our water and air as too restrictive to business development. For the past 2 years, Native Seed Search, with our partners at Seed Broadcast, have collected stories from indigenous farmers in the greater Southwest to record the personal impacts of climate change. And a lot of this perspective is really leading our conservation strategy and our response to climate change at Native Seed Search. Traditional dryland farmers are taking drastic measures to defend the seeds, lands, and rain-fed farming techniques passed down to them for generations. Because of climate change, we are working with the rightful heirs to the seeds in the Native Seed Search collection to grow again in their places of origin. And a lot of this strategy can be summarized by Beata Tsosi Peña, a dryland farmer and a leader of Tewa Women United, in her remarks where she says, "I think you need the right seed. It has to be the seed grown year after year and has adapted through all of the changing climates, through all of the changing seasons. It also involves integrating our spiritual connection to seed and seeing the seeds that we are planting as our children and taking care of them in that way." So thank you very much. Up next, all of the speakers will be available for one-on-one comments to the press in the room. So I'll set the microphone down and leave you all to scrum.